In the first episode of the Nevada Triangle, we explored what happens when the sky itself stops behaving the way we expect it to. The same pattern emerges over and over again and can't be completely explained away. The land, like the sky, is vast, but it isn't empty, and it doesn't stay silent. In the Nevada Triangle, voices linger, lights appear, figures cross roads at night. You see, some places don't explain themselves. They simply respond. Once you leave the towns behind, the buildings thin out and the lights disappear, the experience of this region changes. Highways stretch for miles without interruption. Long, empty roads cut straight through desert basins and mountain passes, places where cell service fades and familiar markers disappear. This is where people begin reporting encounters that don't fit neatly into the norm and become part of the history and part of the mystery. One of the most well-known routes cutting through this region is U.S. Route 50, often called the loneliest highway in America. The name isn't poetic, it's literal. Vast stretches of this road pass through remote, high desert with very little traffic, very few service stations, and long distances between towns. What may begin as a peaceful road trip often changes as the miles stretch on. Drivers describe a subtle but unsettling shift, dissociation, distorted time perception, and a heightened awareness of themselves moving through the landscape. Some report losing track of time entirely, realizing hours have passed when only minutes seem to go by. Others describe missing turns they were actively watching for, or passing landmarks without any memory of doing so. There's also a recurring sensation reported along this route, the feeling of being utterly alone, yet not entirely alone, as if something within the land itself is present, watching, or quietly accompanying those who pass through it. Whether this is the energy of the landscape, the accumulated history of the entire region, or something less easily named, the effect is consistent and difficult to dismiss. Further south, another road carries a very different reputation. Officially known as Nevada State Route 375, it's more commonly called the Extraterrestrial Highway. This route runs near Groom Lake and along the boundaries of highly restricted military land. Most of you have heard of Area 51, I'm pretty sure. For decades, travelers here have reported not only unusual aerial activity, silent lights, hovering objects, and aircraft behaving in ways that don't match conventional flight, but ground-level disturbances as well. Vehicles are said to stall or shut down without warning. Electronics glitch, fail, or behave erratically. Engines refuse to restart until the event is over. During these mechanical failures, people describe the sudden and unmistakable feeling of being watched. If you want a deeper dive into Groom Lake and the aerial activity associated with it, I covered it in the previous video. I'll leave a link below. It's along roads like these, isolated and exposed in the middle of nowhere, that people begin reporting encounters with figures. Drivers describe seeing humanoid forms appear suddenly on or near the roadway, not animals or shadows thrown by headlights, figures that move deliberately, sometimes crossing the road and then vanishing before they can be reached. Some eyewitnesses describe them as tall and thin. Others say pale, almost reflective, which is very interesting. A few report that the figures don't move at all, that they simply stand there, watching, until the moment the headlights pass, and then they're just gone. There are accounts of people pulling over, getting out of their vehicles, convinced someone must have been there, only to find nothing. Nothing. No footprints, no disturbance in the sand, just open land and silence. In other cases, figures are seen far off in the desert, motionless. Witnesses describe the unsettling sense of being observed from a distance, even though nothing moves. When approached, the figures vanish in an instant. What are these drivers seeing? What's striking is how consistent these reports are, especially when they come from different people with no connection to each other. Different years, different roads, different backgrounds, yet the same general area within the triangle, the same details repeat. Tall forms, pale outlines, sudden appearances, and the unmistakable sense that whatever was seen was aware that it was being seen. Witnesses often describe a subtle shift in awareness, not panic. It's subtle. Time seems to slow or stretch. Attention narrows. A quiet hesitation sets in, just long enough for something to feel wrong before the moment passes and the road goes still again. And then the movement continues. The vehicle keeps moving. The person remains engaged, but normal judgment, urgency, or corrective action doesn't fully kick in. That's the connective tissue between drivers and pilots. So what is it that compels drivers to keep going beyond exhaustion? You know what that feels like. Remember, drivers describe a narrowing of focus, a sense of, I'll just go a little farther. Time compressing or stretching. They don't feel the urgency to stop, even when they know they should. It isn't panic, it isn't confusion. It's a quiet override of instinct, of self-preservation. The decision to put the brakes on or stop never comes to the forefront. The same question applies in the air. What compels pilots to fly directly into terrain? In aviation, this phenomenon is known as controlled flight into terrain, or CFIT, CFIT. And it's chilling, precisely because the parallels are so clear. The aircraft is mechanically capable, just like the car. The pilot is conscious, just like the driver. The plane is under control, just like the car. Yet corrective action comes too late or not at all. Pilots report spatial disorientation, loss of reliable visual reference, a false sense of alignment or clearance. They think they're going to make it over the mountain, and they don't. Time pressure that doesn't match reality. Again, not panic, not loss of control, but misplaced continuity. The aircraft keeps flying, the pilot keeps navigating. The perception of the environment stops behaving the way it should. What's altered isn't the task, it's the feedback. The person remains engaged, fully conscious, while the signals that normally say stop, change, or correct fail to assert themselves with urgency. That's the pattern. Drivers describe electronics glitching or resetting suddenly, radios falling silent or suddenly go to static, signals dropping in places where they normally work, and then don't. These are brief interruptions, as if the environment, or even the air itself, momentarily refuses to cooperate. Once they move on, everything goes back to normal. Along Nevada's Extraterrestrial Highway, State Route 375, there was once an unassuming landmark that quietly became one of the most curious stopping points in the Nevada Triangle. Just outside the small town of Rachel, near the edge of restricted federal land, a solitary mailbox sat beside the road. It belonged to a local rancher and served no official purpose beyond mail delivery, yet for years travelers stopped there anyway. They didn't stop because it was marked, they didn't stop because it was advertised. They stopped because word spread that this was a place where people waited. The mailbox came to be known simply as the Black Mailbox, a roadside pause point where visitors lingered, watched the sky, and listened to the silence. No signs explained it, no plaques described it, nothing pointed to it. Still, it drew people in from long distances, often late at night, often alone. And over time, the stories began to accumulate. Over the years, people who stopped at or near the Black Mailbox reported more than curiosity drawing them there. There are repeated personal accounts from visitors describing unusual lights in the sky while stopped along the road at the mailbox. Slow-moving lights, lights that appeared stationary and then vanished, and lights that changed direction or speed without sound. These reports surface again and again in first-hand stories, UFO forums, roadside interviews, and documentaries, not in police logs or official military records. There are also anecdotal reports of figures, though these are more rare and less consistent than the light sightings. When they are mentioned, they're usually described as distant silhouettes near the road or fence line, shapes briefly caught in headlights, or a powerful sense that someone was nearby without a clear visual confirmation. Many witnesses later said they couldn't tell whether they actually saw someone or simply felt watched. Nothing was ever officially logged as an incident at the mailbox itself, no confirmed encounters and no official reports of contact. And that absence is part of what made the place draw people in. People didn't stop because something was happening. They stopped because it felt like something might happen. And for many, it did. Virginia City is one of those places that feels like it never quite finished leaving the past behind. Not abandoned, not frozen in time, but layered. Founded during the Comstock Lode silver boom, it was one of the richest, loudest, most crowded towns in the American West. Thousands passed through. Fortunes were made and lost. Fires tore through it. Disease followed the mines. Death was common, sudden, and everywhere. When the boom faded, the town didn't vanish. It thinned, it slowed, and something else never fully let go. People live in Virginia City today. Tourists visit it every day. Shops open, trains run, drinks are poured. But according to those who spend time here, residents, workers, and investigators, there's a sense that the town operates on two tracks at once. The present moves forward, but the past keeps pace beside it. Almost every historic structure in Virginia City carries paranormal reports. In the old saloons, people talk about hearing barroom sounds after closing, voices overlapping, glasses clinking, the low swell of argument, sometimes the sharp crack of what sounds like a gunshot echoing where no one stands. In hotels, guests report figures appearing in mirrors or photographs, doors opening on their own, and the unmistakable feeling of being watched from the corner of the room. Boarding houses are said to hold footsteps on staircases long after everyone has gone to bed. The town's historic hospital is one of the most unsettling sights. Visitors describe the sense of patients still waiting, still lingering, in rooms that have been unused as hospital wards for over a century. Not visual apparitions necessarily, but pressure, presence, the feeling that something expects care or remembers pain. In schools and public places, people report hearing the familiar scrape and tap of chalk being dragged across a chalkboard, sounds coming from classrooms where chalkboards no longer exist, and the sense of movement just beyond the doorway. The cemetery, of course, goes without saying. The old Silver Terrace burial grounds, perched on slopes above Virginia City, silently watching below. Then there are the mines. Beneath Virginia City runs a network of tunnels that once rang day and night with labor. Even now, people report hearing the faint click of tools, the steady rhythm of work continuing underground. This is where stories of the Tommyknockers surface, small unseen presences said to knock from within a rock. In mining folklore, they were sometimes warnings, sometimes companions, sometimes blamed for collapses. But here the reports aren't dramatic, they're subtle, persistent, as if something is still working, still keeping time below. People often say it doesn't feel like a town full of ghosts. It feels like a town where ghosts never stopped living. Virginia City itself doesn't seem threatening. There's no sense of danger and no overt attempts to frighten. What people describe instead is coexistence, layers overlapping, a place where modern times didn't erase what came before them, and what came before never fully stepped aside. As one of the most haunted cities in the United States, Virginia City definitely adds a powerful layer of atmosphere to the region it resides in, the area known as the Nevada Triangle. Pioneer Saloon sits in Good Springs, Nevada, along the southern edge of the region often associated with the Nevada Triangle. This part of the high desert has long been linked to anomalous sightings, overlapping military and civilian flight paths, and a history of unexplained incidents and disappearances. It's a landscape where unusual events have been documented quietly and repeatedly, often without answers. From the outside, the Pioneer Saloon doesn't look haunted at all. It looks exactly like what it is, an old Wild West desert saloon, preserved by time and long stretches of quiet. You'd never know anything unusual was associated with it. Yet over the years, visitors and staff have described something unexpected here. Not fear, not threat, but presence. The Pioneer Saloon still operates today as an old-style saloon hotel straight out of the Wild West. Not a modern inn, but the kind of place where a bar runs downstairs and a handful of simple, period-appropriate rooms sit quietly upstairs. People report hearing a woman's laughter, light, warm, and playful, sometimes echoing briefly through the building, most often mentioned near or in the ladies' room. Others describe the feeling of being gently accompanied, as if someone familiar is nearby, lingering just out of view. Psychic mediums who have visited the saloon have independently identified this presence as Carole Lombard, the beloved actress who tragically died in a plane crash in 1942. Her aircraft went down on nearby Mount Potosi, only miles from Good Springs, while she was traveling during a wartime Bond tour. Lombard was known in life for her wit, humor, and warmth, qualities that seem to closely mirror the energy people describe here. What's notable is what isn't reported. There are no stories of distress, no warnings, no attempts to frighten or hauntings. Instead, the experiences described at the Pioneer Saloon are affectionate, almost familiar, as if a piece of someone's joy simply chose to stay. These accounts have been shared widely enough to be featured across multiple television programs focused on paranormal investigation, though the reports themselves remain remarkably consistent, regardless of who's listening. This isn't a place where the past feels trapped. It feels remembered, treasured even. Some stories don't end when the event fades. They remain, quietly woven into the places where they mattered most. Before highways cut through the desert triangle, long before aircraft crossed its skies, people were already listening to this land from underneath. Nevada is riddled with old mines. Generations of miners learned quickly that some sounds mattered. Across mining regions, workers reported hearing unexplained knocking from within the rock itself. Rhythmic taps, dull thuds, sometimes faint, sometimes sharp, sounds that didn't match tools, shifts, or known activity. These became known as Tommyknockers. They weren't described as monsters or apparitions. They were something else. Miners described the sounds as deliberate, not random, not the chaotic noise of collapsing stone, but controlled, patterned knocking, as if something was signaling through the rock. Notably, the knocking wasn't always followed by cave-ins. In many accounts, no collapse came at all, just the sound, persistent, unexplained, as if something conscious beneath the ground was active and making itself known. Here again a pattern emerges. Miners who ignored the knocking sometimes walked into disaster. Others claimed the sound stopped them just in time, prompting evacuation moments before collapse. The land didn't always fail without warning. It knocked first. These weren't stories invented later. By the late 1800s and early 1900s, accounts of Tommyknockers were already appearing in newspapers brought to American mines by Cornish and British miners. There are no verified photographs, but the consistency of the reports shows how deeply these warnings were woven into underground work. What makes this harder to dismiss is that similar reports haven't entirely stopped. Even today, parts of Nevada experience unexplained underground vibrations, low-frequency hums, rhythmic tremors, localized seismic anomalies that don't register as earthquakes and don't fit known industrial activity. Which raises a question miners faced generations ago, and we still haven't answered. What exactly is moving beneath the ground? Not all of the sightings in this region involve lights, machines, or human-like figures. Some involve wings. Across Nevada's high desert and surrounding regions, people have reported encounters with gigantic birds, far larger than any known avian species ever recorded. These aren't fleeting glimpses of hawks or vultures at a distance. Eyewitnesses describe bodies that appear heavy, powerful, even prehistoric in build. They're often described as flying low and deliberately, not gliding easily like ordinary birds, but moving with force, as if their weight matters. Wingspans are reported far beyond what should be possible, sometimes estimated at 15 to 20 feet or more. That's huge. The bodies appear thick and muscular, with broad chests. Some accounts mention large beaks and talons capable of tearing. Others describe silhouettes so large they momentarily black out the sky. What's notable is how often these sightings come with the same sense of disbelief. People aren't looking for something unusual. They're driving, hiking, working, going about their daily business, and then they see something so impossible their minds can't make sense of it, yet they know they've seen it. Here in the high desert, these creatures aren't given a single name. They're simply described as giant birds, enormous, out of place, and very unsettling in their size. Similar beings appear in the traditions of other regions. Among indigenous peoples of the American Southwest, there are long-standing accounts of Thunderbirds, immense, powerful sky beings associated with storms, sound, and movement through the air. Though the name Thunderbird suggests an animal, these beings are typically not considered animals in any conventional sense. Instead, they're described as forces of nature associated with thunder, powerful winds, and the shaking of the land itself. It's important to be clear, the Thunderbird belongs to the cultural and spiritual traditions of the American Southwest's indigenous peoples. Here in Nevada's high desert, the reports don't use that name, but the similarities are striking. Enormous wings, heavy bodies, presence felt before it's fully seen. Descriptions that don't align with anything we recognize in modern bird behavior. And this raises a quiet, very uncomfortable question. Are these accounts describing the same phenomenon, interpreted through different cultural lenses? Or are they separate experiences that share a common pattern, something large, aerial, and rarely seen, moving through regions where the land itself seems unusually active? Could sightings like these overlap with other unexplained events in the Triangle, including animal mutilations? Not as a definitive cause, but as parallel mysteries occurring in the same places under the same conditions. There aren't any conclusions here, only patterns. I've included links below to first-hand accounts of giant bird sightings for anyone who wants to dig deeper. When ranchers first began reporting cattle mutilations in this region, the details were immediately disturbing and consistent. Healthy cattle, no signs of struggle, no predator tracks leading in or out, no blood on the ground. And then, upon closer examination, something even more troubling emerged. Carcasses were described as unusually bloodless, especially given the extent of the injuries. Veterinarians noted a lack of hemorrhaging, no pooling of blood, and no evidence of blood loss consistent with trauma or predator attack. In some documented cases, examinations indicated the near total or complete absence of blood, while in others, investigators stopped short of confirming total removal, noting only that the blood loss was inconsistent with any known natural cause. The animal's organs were removed with precision: tongues, eyes, udders, reproductive organs, often cut cleanly, as if by surgical instruments. There were no drag marks, no signs of a struggle. Scavengers frequently avoided the carcasses, sometimes for days, and in many cases entirely, refusing to feed on remains they would normally consume without hesitation. These events were not isolated. Reports spanned hundreds of miles and multiple decades, including documented cases across Nevada and the surrounding high desert region. In some areas, ranchers and law enforcement reported sightings of unmarked, unusually quiet helicopters operating where there was no known reason for them to be present. In a few cases, eyewitnesses described black helicopters, appearing briefly and then vanishing without explanation. The pattern drew federal attention in the 1970s. Although the most intense wave of mutilations occurred in the 1970s, unexplained livestock deaths continue into recent years. Ranchers in the western states reported mutilations in 2025 alone, with animals found drained of blood and displaying the same unsettling signs that drew national attention decades ago. When U.S. Senator Floyd Haskell of Colorado formally requested an FBI investigation, the Bureau reviewed hundreds of reports spanning multiple states. Official FBI files admit the volume and pattern were unusual, but they didn't conclude that any case was caused by forces beyond known natural or predation processes. No individuals or definitive cases were ever identified, and in some correspondence, the Bureau noted it declined to pursue broader federal jurisdiction unless deaths occurred on Indian lands. Imagine that. Veterinary examinations failed to provide conventional explanations for what was found. The absence of blood, the precision of the incisions, and the lack of animal distress didn't align with known predation, predators, disease, or environmental causes. Despite hundreds of documented cases across decades, no definitive cause has ever been identified. And yet, the mutilations continue. Millennia before settlers arrived, the indigenous tribes of Nevada already understood that this land was not neutral. The Paiute, Shoshone, and Washoe lived with an awareness that some places demanded respect, caution, and preparation. The Paiute and Shoshone taught that certain locations were dangerous, not because of animals or terrain alone, but because of what happened to people there. These were places where travelers shouldn't linger, places where hunters lost their sense of direction, where sounds or voices were heard without a visible source, where people became confused, disoriented, or uneasy without knowing why. In oral accounts, these locations were often described as that place where people do not return the same. The exact wording varies, but the meaning is consistent. Some people entered these places and came back altered, different. Others never came back at all. The Washoe were especially careful with specific sites near water, rock formations, passes, and underground spaces. These places weren't forbidden, but they were entered with ritual awareness. Vision could be altered, judgment could fail, time could feel distorted during ceremonies or encounters. These effects were not considered imaginary, they were expected. Indigenous peoples understood them as spirit presence interfering with human perception. Places where spirits confuse the mind, mislead judgment, and alter awareness itself. Places where the land does not want you there. The danger was not violence or attack, it was disorientation. The quiet of the inner signals that tell a person when to stop, turn back, or leave. Across centuries, across cultures, the message is the same. This area known as the Nevada Triangle doesn't announce itself with force. It alters perception. It bends awareness. It keeps people moving when they should stop, and unaware when they should turn back.